Aloha, everyone. Good afternoon to participants in Hawaii. Good evening to participants and panelists on the East Coast of the US. And a very good morning to those who are joining us from Southeast Asia and maybe other parts of Asia. So we do really appreciate the panelists and the participants who are attending this event outside their normal working hours. So that's fantastic. Thanks a lot. I am Sumit Saxena. I'm a senior fellow at the East West Center in Honolulu. And I have been here at the East West Center for about 22 years, and I specialize in the areas of environmental health, mostly in rural areas of Asia and Southeast Asia. So firstly, on behalf of our co-organizers at Michigan State University, University of Hawaii Center for Southeast Asian Studies, the East West Center, the American Institute for Indonesian Studies in Chiang Mai University, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome everyone to this webinar, which is titled Disease and Zoonosis Threats to Smallholder Livelihoods. We want to convey a special thanks and gratitude to the Luce Foundation for its support of our ongoing collaborations. And we invite anyone in the audience who would like to know more about this project and this program and the webinar series to reach out to us. The University of Hawaii Center for Southeast Asian Studies, the East West Center, and Michigan State University webinar series on Southeast Asia and transition has, I believe, been going on for more than 2 years. This event follows on themes that have arisen in our previous webinars on water justice, palm oil plantationization of Southeast Asia, migrations, mobilities in the region, spiritual landscapes, and forest rights, among other things. Wow, that's quite a lot. The links to these webinars will be placed in the chat for all viewers to access at the end of our panel. And this link to this one also will be included there. For the past 4 months, the program team has developed 4-part series focusing on smallholders. And today we will be ending the series more broadly on the issues of zoonosis. It's my privilege and pleasure to be a moderator. And one of the tasks of the moderator is to talk about the importance of the topic, the significance of the topic, and then invite the panelists to add their views on why they think this topic is important, and then, of course, their work about it. So rather than throw a lot of numbers about how many people, how many animals have died, what percentage of GDP has been affected by zoonotic diseases, how a smallholder has been affected financially, and so on, I would like to highlight the importance of this topic by sharing a story that very recently happened. And when Micah asked me to moderate this panel, I thought it's quite a coincidence because this story was still fresh in my mind. As I said, I'm an environmental health scientist focusing largely on pollution issues, but in 2009, I was invited to be a part of a team that looked at zoonotic diseases, a project funded by National Science Foundation. So we used a socio-ecological systems framework, which National Science Foundation called a coupled natural and human systems project. It was highly mixed methods at all scales of analysis, from household to provincial scales, country level, geospatial modeling, the works. Everyone from psychology, human psychologists, to veterinarian sciences, urban planners, geographers, environmental scientists, a huge multidisciplinary team. So I took a deep dive into the literature and learned all about zoonotic diseases, smallholders, and so on. And I began to appreciate the issue, especially that of smallholders, what their role is, how they are impacted. You know, the project was motivated by the fact that the smallholders, their livelihoods were affected in Vietnam and during 2003 to 2004, and then 5 to all these 3 waves of epidemics in poultry. So I had this very textbook knowledge of these issues, read journal articles, I read magazine articles, and appreciated, most of it sounded commonsensical. Then in 2016, some of you might remember, Melinda Gates wrote this blog. The title of the blog is the small animal that's making a big difference for women in the developing world, sorry. The small animal that's making a big difference for women in the developing world. And together in that blog, she also, either, I don't know whether it's her original quote or she was re-quoting someone, that the chicken and poultry, they are the ATM of the poor. And specifically for women, that's a source of livelihood, and it empowers them, it gives them control, it gives them a sense of ownership of a small business. Therefore, Melinda Gates was making the argument that to protect the health of poultry and chicken and ducks and so on is a crucial thing for the world community. Bill Gates himself then retweeted or he wrote a blog based on Melinda Gates thing. So the idea being that you need to protect the health of small animals so that the welfare of women is in rural countries, rural places is protected. Again, all textbookish stuff for me. I appreciated that. But last November, I was in Vietnam, and 3 hours outside Hanoi, in a province called Hanam, I was doing some field survey on the problem of burning of crop residues, and nothing to do with zoonosis, just the burning of crop residues. So you're talking to some farmers. But from Hanoi, a group of students, 3 or 4 students undergraduate students had accompanied us. And we did our surveys and so on. Then one of the students, after we had done with our work, one of the students said that her village was nearby, so she invited us for tea. And we went over to a place, a very modest, typical rural house in Vietnam. And then when I was returning with that group of students who were obviously helping us with translation and liaison and so on, I was puzzled about something, because she came from one of the best universities in Hanoi. And it would have been expensive even with any scholarship the government has given her. And she told me that she was raised by a single mother because she had lost her father to cancer when she was very young. And so I was very puzzled that how can this poor mother afford to send her daughter to Hanoi, far away, and this girl would travel to her village every weekend to be with her mother. And she had a much older brother and a very young brother who was actually adopted by the mother. So a single mother for all her life had raised 3 kids. And I was wondering, how does this family afford to send this daughter to one of the best universities in Hanoi? After a while, we got talking, became friendly. Then I asked her, this thing really puzzles me. Your mother is single. You told me that you lost your father long back. So how is it? She said, my mother raises chickens, and that's how she's been able to send me to the best university in Hanoi. And this is for the first time that I understood what I was reading the textbooks, that, okay, this is the reality that's happening in these villages with the smallholder farmers. And therefore, it is really important to protect the health of the animals, the livestock, and the farmers who are raising these animals. So to me, that was a personal story that connects me to the smallholders, the zoonotic diseases, and so on. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce the panel to you. And what we have decided to do is that I'll just make a bare bones introduction to the panelists, the distinguished panelists, and they are going to talk about their story. Just like I told you a story, I'd like to hear their stories about how they got into this field. Why do they feel it is important? So we have Professor Siddharth Chandra from Michigan State University, who is the director of Asian Studies there. He's also a professor in the economics department, I believe. Then from his same university, his colleague, Dr. Ramji Ghimere, also joins us today. Dr. Ghimere is at the Animal Science Department at MSU. And finally, our third panelist, Mr. Huyen Ming Kwang, who is a lecturer at Kantha University, but also interestingly, he's the co-founder of the Mekong Environment Forum a very well-known NGO there. So as I said, let's get this thing going. We will be asking the panelists to describe their backgrounds, educational backgrounds, the career steps they took, how they got into this field of pandemics, epidemics, zoonosis, smallholders, any angle, any hook that you can find. Please talk story about them. Please tell us about, typically in your research, what kind of methods do you use, what scale of analysis you work on, which geographies do you work in, and how your various experience in your careers have shaped your views about zoonosis and small farmer holders. So I will request each panelist to talk story for about 5 minutes. So first, Siddharth, why don't you go?
Thank you, Sumit, for that kind introduction and very interesting anecdote as well. Hello, everybody. My name is Siddharth Chandra. I'm a professor at Michigan State, as Sumit mentioned. My appointment is actually in James Madison College, which is our College of Public Affairs. I also have a courtesy appointment in the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at MSU. And that's actually the angle I'm going to take on what I talk about today. My training, I have a PhD in economics. I got it from Cornell University longer ago than I care to admit. But while I was doing it, I did a graduate certificate in Southeast Asian Studies as well, which took me to Indonesia. I learned Indonesian, and I ended up writing a dissertation on Indonesia as well. I've always been interested in history. While I was doing a PhD, I did a lot of reading on the Netherlands East Indies, which is basically the precursor to what we know as Indonesia today. One of the things I discovered is that the Dutch, the colonial authorities, had left a real treasure trove of material for researchers to study by way of reports and statistics and so on. And being an economist by training, I was naturally drawn to the numbers. Lots of Dutch East Indies numbers sitting in Cornell's Southeast Asian collection. And the dissertation that I wrote ended up containing a paper on the sale of opium in the Netherlands East Indies. Now, while I was studying opium, which was being sold through the 1900s up until the time of independence, I discovered that I needed to know what the population of Indonesia was for every year that I was studying the sale of opium. And when I looked at the numbers, I found something very strange. It looked like the population had not increased as much as it should have between 1910 and 1920. And when I looked a little more closely, I discovered that, of course, the 1918 influenza pandemic, with which we all are familiar today, had struck Indonesia with some significant force. So that drew me into the study of the 1918 flu pandemic. I'm actually going to focus my comments today on that. And I think I might stop there because I've already done a few minutes and pass the mic over to Ramji.
Yes, Ramji, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Siddharth. Sorry. Let me share my slide. I think it'll be easier for to introduce to my slide. Hi, everyone. Good morning in Southeast Asia. Good evening in the US, and good afternoon elsewhere. I'm Ramji Gimire. I am faculty in the College of Ag and Natural Resources at Michigan State University. And I am originally from Nepal. I have been at MSU for the last 14 years or so. I did my PhD from College of Agriculture and Natural Resources, focusing on international ag development. I'm undergrad veterinary medical student graduate. I did my graduate undergrad in veterinary medicine from India. And before that, I grew up in a small rural farm family in Nepal. And I did my schooling there, and I raised several livestock, including buffalo, cattle. I even grazed, these animals. And originally, when I was raising those livestock, I didn't know what zoonotic diseases were. what what's in terms of the public health relationship, what are the issues, the relationship between livestock and animal, or livestock and human being. And after I did my schooling, I went to India for my veterinary medical degree, and there I had the opportunity to know that how significant it is, the zoonotic diseases are to not only to human being, but also to livestock and the environment, and how this is impacting the livelihood of smallholder farmer. After I did my undergrad in veterinary medicine from India, I joined the government of Nepal Services, and where I served for over 15, 16 years. And I had the opportunity of working with a smallholder, mostly with a smallholder farmer. And there I could see the smallholder farmer, how tough it was and challenging it was for them to grow their animals, given that these animals were suffering from several diseases, as well as managing the nutrition and the health aspects was very tough for them. And after my undergrad and some service in some years service in the government in Nepal, I went to Australia for masters in egg and rural development. And there also I did some case studies in the dairy farm in there. And that also gave me an opportunity to understand more about and also understand the difference between a small and large farmer, how the contrast, see the contrast. And after serving in the government of Nepal for 15, 20 years, I had the opportunity to come to the US for PhD, and mostly my PhD work. And thereafter, I have been working in Southeast Asia, Africa, mostly working with a smallholder farmer. But currently, I am leading a project on Mekong. We call it Mekong One Health Innovation Program. It is basically promoting One Health approach to improve the health security of the region. We work with One Health University network of Thailand, Vietnam, and Laos. So basically, even though this our activities are mostly at the institutes or the tertiary level educational institutions, but our focus is to train those people and the faculty and the students, and encourage them to go to the village, to go to the community, and serve the smallholder farmer, so that the smallholder farmer also understand and community members understand the importance of zoonotic diseases and how they have been affected, how the livelihood have been affected by these issues. So I stop here. I have more to share about our program, maybe later. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ramji. Fascinating. Now we go on to the third and last panelist. Wang, you're on.
Thank you, Dr. Sumnet. Thank you, Dr. Min Lee Young, and the organizers for inviting me. I'm happy to have this opportunity to talk with you all today. And this is Quang from Cantor University. And thank you again, Dr. Sumnet, for your great introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Quang. I'm Min Wang from Cantor University, and I'm also co-founder of the Mekong Ramen Forum, NGO based in Cantor City, the center of the Mekong and Delta of Vietnam. I completed an MA in Southeast Asian Studies, just like Dr. Rami, I'm also closely working with the grassroots communities, farmers in the lower Mekong Delta, in the lower Mekong Delta, in response to the increasing impacts of the climate change and Mekong dams. And in 2017, I and James Burton founded the Mekong Ramen Forum to work with the local communities to find solutions to help them or try the grassroots transition to sustainability in the lower Mekong region, including Cambodia. I completed my PhD research in the Netherlands as well, but I consider myself as a geopolitist. But in my NGO, I list many projects dealing with the policy and environmental security issues, including recently pandemic, as we are facing the COVID-19. So last year, but generally, my NGOs is focusing on citizen science. Citizen science can be like our key approach to our projects in my NGO. But last year, we were supported by the US government to implement a very important project that helps local farmers, fishermen that we all call citizen scientists to contribute data to have scientists recognize the rubber hotspots for disease. So that could be like the bottom-up approach to combat with the public health and environmental security issues in the lower Mekong region. And I found that's highly relevant for our topics to discuss today. So that's why I'm here. I'm not measuring or specializing in Zoonosis or One Health, to be honest. But my projects really deal with us. That means One Health approach, and we work with our colleagues in CDC and some other organization dealing with One Health, like Southeast Asian university for One Health Network. I don't know exactly the name, but the appreciation like Hoon, and we learn a lot about One Health approach from them and how to embed One Health approach in our projects as we are working with local science volunteers to combat the new insecurity issue. So thank you very much for the invitation again, and I'm very much happy to meet you all today, and looking forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Quang. Didn't you have some slides to show as well?
Sure. May I start our slides now, right? Okay. I have a short presentation about our project that I just mentioned. This is about the women vulnerability tracker, and this project just finished 1 month ago. We are now working with partners to scale up this project to Cambodia as well. So I'm going to briefly introduce a little bit this project. This is the WVE tracker. This is a project that was aimed to reduce a mobile app which use crowdsourcing and data analytics to provide what we call the near real-time reporting and data downloads about the previously unreported indicators of DC hotspots in the Mekong Delta. So in the pilot stage, we focus primarily in the Mekong Delta of Vietnam. And this project is funded through the U.S. Department of State because of the MUSP health program. The project aims to provide weekly updates and policy reports on purple disease hotspots to help the local environments and donors and practitioners timely identify the purple hotspot of disease in communities, especially rural communities, where women are most at risk of disease. And in our project, we focus on 3 types of disease. That's the climate sensitive disease, water-borne disease, and zoonotic disease. And this is our approach. As I mentioned earlier to you, that's we rely on citizen science is our that's our key approach to our process. And in this process, citizen science is also the key. We mobilize citizen science volunteers in communities across the Mekong Delta to use our mobile app to collect and contribute data. And from those crowdsourcing data, we we analyze. We have a team consisting of scientists. Some of them are from the One Health University Network in Vietnam to have analyze and generate reports and policy recommendation. So these are on our approach. Just highlight our approach and methodology. And this is the stream, the app stream, and how it's work. So users use our app to identify the indicators of the disease in their communities through their day-to-day work. They can report disease everywhere and everywhere they are able to do so. And on the data, including photos and some other quantitative data, will be uploaded to our app, and that's how we identify the correct and particular location of where we identify the probable hotspots of disease. So I'm going to move on. And we also collaborated with a number of local partners, including local universities and government agencies, to implement our project. And we recruited a number of student scientists whom we have trained with some skill sets about field research and other One Health related issues. And here are some key outputs from our work. So we have about 15 weeks of field work in the research sites, and our student science volunteers have generated over 6,000 observations, and we produced over 112 weekly reports. And thanks to our data, we have identified and helped the local communities terminate timely sick probable disease hotspot in their territories. As we are into the post-COVID-19 era in the Delta, and that leads to the increased numbers of migrants across the border. I mean the Cambodian-Vietnamese border. So there is a very high risk of transparent disease outreach. So we are trying to work with possible partners to scale off our project to Cambodia. And in our project workshops in Kantha City 2 months ago, we collaborated with some local NGOs in Cambodia, and we are working together to, find further support to scale off relocate our mobile app WB Tracker to Cambodia, so that to expand our impact and cover of the project in the near future. So those are some key features are something I would love to share with you, and I would love to welcome your comments or any further question in the coming minutes. Thank you very much for your listening.
Thanks, Phong. Very, very fascinating stuff. We'll get back to this soon. So we have about 30-35 minutes where we will talk amongst ourselves. and then open up the last half hour for questions from the participants who are online. So I think, as the organizers have advised me, let's pretend we are in a coffee shop. We have heard about each other's work and we want to probe each other and satisfy our curiosity. So before I start off with any prompts, I would like to ask the three panelists that after you have heard the other two panelists, is there something that you want to react to or ask for more information, or you have any insights on similar topics and so on?
Sumita, I have a question. I have few more slides to show. I thought that was the introduction time.
Oh,
So,
okay, sure. Okay.
Is it okay if I?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Siddharth, you also have other slides?
Yeah, I have a few too.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. My fault. Yeah.
So it's showing okay, Sumit?
Yeah. Sure. At least on my screen. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much again, Sumit and colleague, for this opportunity. And as we heard from our colleague and myself, I share some of my experience of zoonosis. So we all know that in today's globalized society, disease is threat anywhere, is disease threat everywhere. So as we witnessed during the time of the COVID pandemic. So it affects, disease is mostly the pandemic and majority of the zoonotic diseases that doesn't say either a small or big farmer or the developed or poor country. So said, especially if we see the cycle of the disease emergence, pre-emergence to after pandemic stage, we see this, the 6 stages, and especially the pathogen is spillover from pre-emergence to the emergence, and that grade mal, that's the very critical stage. And especially the smallholder farmers who are very vulnerable, they have as we were discussing earlier, they have 1 or 2 cattle or 1 or 2, poultry or 1 or 2 goat. If they happen to be the victim here, they will be suffering not only themselves, not only their livestock, they may also be suffering from the disease spillover. So, there will be a big impact, and our effort should be to stop this spillover from wildlife to through vectors, for example, domestic animals, and or other vectors to the human being. And especially, as we know, 70% of the infectious diseases are of zoonotic nature. So we can imagine how important it is, these animal origin diseases or pathogens. And earlier I mentioned briefly about the health security. And when we talk about the diseases, there are 5, 6 stages we have to be very careful, mindful of: preventing, detecting, timely detecting, and responding on time, and providing health services to equally to all, and having the laws and regulation in place, as well as having financial and other risk bearing capacity, but not only at the global, national level, but at the community level, regional level, and globally. That is very important, and this also has a great impact on a smallholder farmer. So I briefly alluded earlier, Mekong One Health Innovation Program. To address that, we have been implementing in 3 countries. We have this program. There are 3 objectives. I'm briefly showing you because this is directly related to the topic that we are discussing today. The first one is creating national network, transnational network, for which we are conducting the webinar. And second one is educating the people, especially the faculty, students, and other stakeholders, and through them reaching out to the community and to the farmer as well. And the thirdly, we also, even though we don't do research ourselves, but we provide some research funding to be undertaken by the local researcher, and this is upcoming. and we are conducting a webinar. Another webinar is upcoming on mid-25. This is on environmental health, wastewater treatment. And so this is the course we recently completed because I heard Sumit mentioning about the curriculum development. So this course was very comprehensive. Over 500 people they register, and 200 of them we allow to attend. And we have speakers from Mekong region as well as US and Europe and elsewhere. It was very interesting. We are hoping this message will reach out to smallholder farmers as well. And this is our structure you were talking about earlier. Who are the stakeholders we are working with? We are mostly working with One Health University Network, Sihon, Lahon, Bohon, and Tohon. And we have advisory board, and we have country coordinator helping us connect the US, with the local researcher and stakeholder. And our effort is, even though it doesn't seem to be directly, related or impacting the smallholder, but our effort is creating the transnational network of Africa, USA, Asia, and the current network of the Sihon, and then strengthening the One Health approach, and to address the zoonosis and other these very concerning diseases and improving the health security of the region. So some of the things it may come up later, but we did a small survey among stakeholders in the region. Our survey results say that the educational messages or the information about One Health and zoonosis, zoonotic diseases are not, they haven't reached to the community level, the ultimate beneficiary. So there should be an educational program or the curriculum that represents them, and that is, supportive of them, that suited their capacity. So that is very essential. Another is information sharing within countries, within communities, and between the communities, and between the country and region. And there should be more research, especially on, we see that environmental health aspect is still overlooked compared to animal and human health. And advocacy is still, lacking in many of the countries there. And community-based programs need to be given priority. And it should be not only top to bottom, but bottom-up approach should be, we need to follow, so that the concern or the sorrows or the challenges smallholders are facing or the communities are facing, we listen to them and we hear them. So our effort will be to working with the stakeholder and to help all the communities, including smallholder farmer. So I stop here. Sorry, I think I took a little bit longer time. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ramji. Siddharth, you're on. Apologies to all three of you for messing up on the format of this.
Thank you for that. I'll try to make this really quick. What I thought I might do is in the introduction, I mentioned that my interest turned to the 1918 influenza pandemic. I think, as everybody knows, it's a zoonotic disease. In fact, the virus that causes it is an H1N1 avian influenza virus. And so when we talk about chickens and ducks and so on, they can be vectors for these kinds of diseases. So just very quickly, what is this project about? We're talking about the global 1918 flu pandemic. I started work on this project about maybe 15 years ago. And in the first, I'd say 10 to 12 years, I used to talk to people about it, and most people will say, what are you talking about? And then COVID-19 happened, and all of a sudden, when, at least in the early stages, because we didn't know much about COVID, everybody was talking about the 1918 pandemic. And we offered a course here at Michigan State University to our medical students. I think we had a few hundred of the students take a short course on pandemics, and the 1918 flu pandemic was used as a model to think about the COVID-19 pandemic. So very briefly, here are some statistics and some information about it. It manifested in multiple waves. This is now something we are familiar with in the context of COVID-19. The death toll was massive. In the United States, it was 675,000. But to keep things in perspective, the death toll from COVID-19 has been 1.1 million in the United States. So it's been a really devastating pandemic. And it was also very high in India and in Indonesia, which I've studied. What I'd like to focus on, because we have a Southeast Asia focus here, is just a few of the interesting findings from Indonesia. So, before I go into that, these are some of the broader questions we've been looking at: patterns of propagation, whether there are particular entry points, how the disease spreads, whether there are transportation routes that are involved, and so on. But let me go to the focus of what I wanted to talk about today for just a couple of minutes. So it turns out when you look at what happened in Indonesia, the pandemic hit Indonesia particularly hard. And this is a bit of a puzzle because when we think about influenza viruses, typically we think about cooler temperatures. If you look at the flu virus in the lab, generally it thrives in cooler temperatures than are found in countries like Indonesia. Indonesia has a warm climate. So one of the big questions is, why was the pandemic so severe in Indonesia? And so let me advance this slide. So here are some hints that we get. So I've taken some excerpts from a report of the health officer in the Regency of Magelang. If you know the geography of Indonesia, Magelang is a district, basically a district located in the central part of central Java. Java is one of the most densely populated areas in the world and also in Indonesia. But what I want to bring to your attention is just the translations. I've translated what we found in the report. So the first translation reads, 60 people died in 1 week in a village which had a total population of 822. Okay, so this is the virus wiping out 7% of the population of a village in 1 week. And remember, the flu was around for many, many weeks in these locations. So the total death toll exceeded the 7%. In another report, it says that almost 2 million natives had died of the disease. And this is very important. With the 1918 influenza, nutrition played a very important role. So it is evident that this large death is due to insufficient food. Finally, just one more snippet that tells us that in another location, about 11% of the population lost their lives to the pandemic. Okay, so we put this in perspective, those kinds of percentages, right? In the United States, we've lost 1 million people to the COVID-19. You're multiplying that by about 10 to think about, you're taking it up to close to 10% of the population if you're looking at this kind of magnitude. So you're looking at 20 to 30 million people. If proportionally the COVID-19 pandemic had hit the United States as hard as the 1918 flu pandemic hit some of these rural areas in Indonesia. So why do I mention this? Well, when we think about the populations in those areas, they're all smallholder. This is all agriculture, right? These are small farmers. They don't have large-scale farming yet in Java. In fact, the land in the area doesn't lend itself to large-scale farming the way it might in certain other parts of the world. And one thing that really jumps out is how the impact of nutrition or lack thereof played a very, very important role in determining outcomes. This is something I was actually looking at very closely when COVID-19 happened. I don't think people have found a similar association, but with the 1918 influenza, this was a very, very important association. There were significant differences in mortality rates depending on depending on your nutritional status. And then finally, I'll just give you one other way in which, when we talk about these kinds of zoonotic diseases, how they interact with behavior in rural areas. So this is an observation by, again, I think it may have been the same health. Yeah, it's the same health officer. And he talks about how the bazaars, right, where people come to buy their vegetable, their produce, and they sell, livestock and produce, how these are congregating areas which become hubs for the spread of the disease. And then the disease goes back out into the more remote areas where you have the farmers doing their farming. And I'll end by just showing you a series of maps that actually shows this pattern of spread in this location. We took the information, the qualitative information that this health officer had given us in the report, and we actually put it on a map. So this is a map showing a major highway The highway on the lower right side comes from the city of Yogyakarta, which is a major city in central Java, Indonesia. And what you're going to see is you're going to see the disease come up the highway. It's going to stop first in the areas with the big circles. Those are the major markets. And then you're going to see it radiate out into the little villages where the smallholders are actually engaging in their agriculture. So I'll just play this and then I'll stop there. Hopefully this raises some questions and we have the opportunity to discuss some of these phenomena. So this is the first week, October 11 to 17, 1918. Second week, it's spreading out. The third week, it moves further down the road on the left side. The fourth week, it starts moving north to the more remote villages in the hilly areas. And by the fifth week, pretty much all of the locations on the map are infected by the flu. So I'll stop over there. So this is the kind of research we've done. It has slightly more of an epidemiologic focus. But if you have questions about modeling, I think that's an area also that I'm very interested in. And we can talk about animal to human transition and epidemiologic transmission in epidemiologic models. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Siddharth. So as I said, okay, we have about 20 minutes now to talk amongst ourselves and open it up to questions. So I'd like to first give all the three panelists a chance to react to what others have said, and or you want some more information on what the other panelists said. So this is the time. Any show of hands?
I have a question, or rather curiosity, Siddharth. You have closely watched or I think examined the flu pandemic in Indonesia. It's like one of the factors you mentioned is the food, food deficit or scarcity, whatever you say. What could be other factors? Where there, you say bazaar is the one of the junction where people from the city area as well as from the village area come together and exchange or the trade their goods. Am I right? Was that the factor because they come close to each other and the virus coming from the city area and happen to be there, and the people from rural area who didn't have virus and catch them?
Yes. So in this instance, right, the zoonotic transmission did not happen there, right? It happened in another part of the world and it entered Indonesia and then found its way here. But the way the story goes is what was happening is the virus first got to the big city, Yogyakarta, and it created havoc with the food markets there. And so there were food shortages. And so people from the city started coming up this road into the more rural areas. They said, look, there are food shortages in the city. Let's see if we can find food up the road. So when they come up to the village, to the more rural areas, they're still on the main road. But when they come up to the more rural areas searching for food, they bring the virus with them. And so the villagers who are coming down to sell their produce, right, and to buy produce, end up getting infected and take it out to their villages. So that's really the story of the transmission in Magalang.
Excellent.
Great. Anything else, Kwang?
I had a question of Kwang. It's a fascinating database that you've created. And it lends itself to, I think, a variety of interesting types of epidemiologic analyses. So, what are the kinds of analyses that you've already conducted? Do you have collaborations with people to actually analyze the data in different ways using, epidemiologic models? For example, you're probably familiar with compartmental models in epidemiology, susceptible, exposed, infected, removed, those types of models. Are you using these kinds of data to look at, with these models to try to understand how these diseases are spreading?
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Chandra, for that concern. Actually, our project is based on what we consider science. That means we involve the volunteers from communities, particularly farmers, women, and students. So it's quite challenging if we employ the technical terms, complex methodology. Basically, we rely on crowdsourcing data. That means you have to use the simple language and the easy for understanding questionnaires. That's the way we can mobilize and encourage the citizens to contribute what we call big data, because the key the key objectives of the project is to reduce the crowdsourcing data for identify the probable hotspots of disease, so we don't rely too much on technical modeling or analysis model, as you mentioned. But basically, we try to improve the awareness of the local communities, those who have close contact with the animals and wildlife, to understand about the environmental and health, public health security measures. And by doing so, we how to prevent their behaviors that could pose some risk or fewer possible disease in their communities, such as animal poaching or wild trade. But our researchers who are responsible for analyzing the data, they do use some, methodology solutions, including how to translate the citizen science data into, scientific report. So that's the keys. That's their job actually. We because the data we collected from our citizens are quite general, so we try to develop the questionnaires in our app to collect as much data as possible, those including the qualitative and quantitative data. And as I mentioned, there's some video clips, the short videos and photographs taken by our users. So those are for our verification and some other scientific purposes. Like farmers, they don't have the knowledge about the One Health or the Zoonosis or about disease. They don't have ideas about that, but they do observe the habitats of mosquitoes, for example. So they took some photos about mosquitoes, different types of mosquitoes in their community or in their houses. So by doing so, they have this, our scientists identify which type of mosquito is causing the dengue or some other disease in their community. So that's something you can imagine what we are doing here. Yeah. I hope that's clear to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
I would like to add one point to what Siddhartha mentioned earlier about the disease transmission from city area to the rural area. There is another pathway especially from the jungle, the forest or wildlife to, domestic animal, then to human being. Because these days, what is happening, the forest or the natural habitats are being destroyed. Because of that, wildlife are coming out in search of food and shelters and coming in contact with the domestic animals. And there are already several viruses in those wildlife in latent stage when they happen to be in stress, and they got transmitted or they mutate and get transmitted to the domestic animals. Then from there to the human beings. So that is also, there is another pathway. Let us not only think that it is from city to rural area. So there are, or there is a more heavy phenomena happening, that is leading to the transfer or the transmission of the diseases from wildlife to the domestic animals, then to the human beings. So that also we have to be mindful of.
Thanks.
Yeah, well, yeah, I would like to ask one more comment to Dr. Remy. Actually, we have, I think it depends on the geographical areas. I mean, the geographical and socio-economic context. Like in the Mekong Delta, Vietnam, you see we have a limited area of natural forest, where we can see the transmission between the wildlife animals to the domestic animals. But like bird flu, we do have here, so we focus on that. This could be some kinds of zoonosis disease, because farmers they do have close contact with bird flu through their poultry farms. So I mean, it depends on the. I mean, that could be the context specific when we talk about that. So I would suggest, I would say that we have to customize our solution or any strategies to the public health, and make it context specific, because different area needs different solution. And yep.
Agree. I think that's an excellent comment.
And yeah, and very briefly, I didn't hear you both mentioned about the climate related stressors as a driver of disease. Like Dr. Chandra mentioned, in Indonesia, I work there, and I know that's very hot weather there. My friends call us, we have like 3 seasons in Indonesia, like the hot season, the hotter season, and the hottest season. So do you think there is any driver from climate change, like El Nino effect, that increase the likelihoods of disease in rural communities in Cambodia, because they have close contact with the jungle, they burn the jungle, wildlife, fire, and some other kinds of disasters related to climate change? What is your comment? Yeah.
So, that's a great question. I can't answer in terms of specifics, because there are so many factors that, as Ramji mentioned, right? There are many factors that cause epidemics are, have multidimensional sort of causes. But I think it's very reasonable to imagine that as climate changes, it becomes potentially less favorable for certain types of pathogens and more favorable for others, right? Just like it does for other species, whether they're animals or plants. And I think there's quite a bit of research in the lab. So there's a lot of in vitro research that, looks at, okay, under what temperature and humidity conditions does, what happens to the structure of a virus, for example, what happens to its transmissibility, what happens to its survivability, what happens to its ability to replicate. Those studies have happened quite a bit in the lab. And so we have an idea about the parameters for temperature and humidity for a number of pathogens. Of course, once you go out into the wild, it's no longer happening in a controlled environment, right? So it gets much more complicated. But I do know in the case of the influenza virus that the viruses tend to favor cooler and drier conditions. And when you're in a hot and humid place like Java, at least 6 months of the year, it's humid, very humid. It's probably not the best place for the transmission and the propagation of the influenza virus.
Yeah. So I would say that there's like the nexus between the climate change and the poverty and the disease. Climate change exacerbate the poverty, and in that way, farmers are more vulnerable to disease.
Yeah. Let me add to that. So then you can ask the question, well, why was it so successful in Java, the influenza virus, right, of 1918? And I would argue that, the virus does well within the host, right? So the environment within the host body is very favorable for the survival and the propagation of the virus. Even if the weather is not favorable, if you have a high population density, then the time that the virus spends outside a host is reduced, right? Transmission from host to host is much easier and quicker. So it may very well be that crowded. In fact, if you look at that Dutch East Indies report, in that Bazaar paragraph, they mentioned crowding, right? A crowded environment. So, there are mitigating factors, right? And it may very well have been that high population density was a mitigating factor. It mitigated the negative effects of climate, of weather on the virus in the case of these markets in Java. and
Yes, so
allow
we are
the
coming
virus to spread.
close to the next part of the webinar where we will be opening up the session to the questions. But before that, I'd like to say one thing, and I have one prompt which you can all briefly respond to. So the statement that I want to make is related to what was just discussed in the last 3 or 4 minutes. So remember that NSF project that I talked about. So one of the things that we discovered there using geospatial epidemiological models done at the commune level and the municipal ward levels, that is commune level is in Vietnamese, is that if you have places where there are only small holders, the incidence rate is slightly less. If you have places where you have only industrial scale poultry, the incidence is also relatively less. So where is the place where the highest incidence was found? It is the place where these intensive forms of poultry and the extensive forms of poultry, that is the smallholder poultry and the industrial scale poultry, they coexisted. And guess what? Most of these places were in peri-urban areas. I don't want to get more into that unless someone takes this up in the next 30 minutes or so. So I'll get to my prompt, and after the prompt, we'll open it up to the panel, the participants' question. But even before that, I want to give you all three of you a heads up. When we end this session today, I will be coming back to each of you, and you have to tell me or tell all of us in very short terms, one thing that you learned from the other panelists that was new to you or that impressed you, that you learned from the other panelists, and that is how we will end the session. So I'm giving you a heads up, you can think about that. So my prompt is this, and I think in different ways you have already discussed this that in your field, what challenges have you faced communicating science to the non-scientists or the other stakeholders? And I've seen clearly you have done this with all different kinds of stakeholders at all different levels of administration. So actually, I want to first start off with Ramji, because I think it looks like in a previous avatar, you were in the government. So now as a scientist, if you were to go and talk with government officials and try to convince them to adopt laws or anything that relate to One Health and prevention of zoonosis, what would your approach be in trying to communicate science to the government stakeholders?
Excellent question, Sumit. That's the puzzle that we are still struggling with to answer, because after time, what we see is, even though the politicians or the leaders, they talk about public health or this kind of thing, but their priority is where the vote comes from, or their priorities are different. So we should, so the focus is, it's really challenging for the scientists to have a communication, some kind of tools or the brief or the document that is, very short, very succinct, a couple of pages, and that tells that is very appealing and very easily understandable, that can be shared with the politicians, and also using different channels and reaching out to them, and making them convinced that this should be the priority going forward. So, and for that, Sumit, in our case in Lower Mekong, what we have seen is it is not only technical knowledge that is important. As you mentioned, the societal, the dynamic that is happening in society that cannot be solved or that cannot be understood through technical angle, technical eye only. So our paradigm shifts and understanding the social dynamics, we should be, even the technical person should also understand the social skills, soft skills. So these University One Health University Network, they have been advocating, they have been trying to teach the soft skills to their students and faculty, and also to the community, so that they understand the community dynamics, they understand the community needs, and pass the message, effectively to the community. So I think that should be the way forward, especially convincing the politicians. And another thing, Sumit, I also like to, emphasize that whatever we discuss, whatever we laws or regulations or plans or strategy we develop, come up with, if the government governments do not approve those, they will be left in the self, So having politicians convince their political commitment, political leaders' commitment is paramount. So we also have to be advocating, from our angle to convince them through the tools that I mean, as Kwang mentioned earlier, the context, we may have different, context-specific tools we may have to use, but having the politicians convinced is very important. So, so I stop here. But there is not an easy solution, but the solution could be different for different contexts. But this is really challenging, and they're reaching out to them, convincing them, using different tools that is very appealing, easy to understand is paramount. That's my experience.
Thanks, Ramji. Now going from government officials all the way down to the common farmer, Kwang. So you are already into that solution space with citizen science, co-creation of knowledge, participatory research, and so on. And you already hinted about some solutions or challenges you have faced, but would you like to, for a minute, elaborate a little more on how you as a scholar or as a scientist would love to see, communications with farmers improve so that they understand the value of what NGOs like you are doing, what professors or lecturers like you are doing?
Thank you, Sumnes. I'm not sure if I fully get your question, but I would say this way. We have, over the last 5 years, we have worked closely with different communities in the Lower Mekong region, and we need different strategies to involve farmers and local people to engage in our, to contribute to our process. So that's a very big key challenge, because farmers generally don't understand the something that scientists and experts talking about, like climate change or disease or anything. What their main concerns is about their daily life, incomes and meals and things. So when we mobilize them or empower them to take action in response to the challenges, we see that citizen science through success because because citizen science we can change farmers in what we call the non-confrontational ways. It means we scientists cannot come to tell the farmer to do this or not to do that, but we need to demonstrate what's really happening in their eyes from their experience that they don't understand, and we need to demonstrate what's really helpful and really work for them through their day-to-day work. In other words, we need demonstration size. If we approach to work about something related to livelihoods in terms of pandemic. In our WV chapter in particular, we have to train a number of what we consider scientists as the chain agents. So those are active farmers and students who love to learn new knowledge and skill sets and understand what's happening in their communities. So
Nice.
from those chain agents, we provide some toolkits and knowledge, and they will in turn train their neighbors and family members and their friends in the communities. So that's how we regularly expand the impact of our work and regularly make a change in the communities. So in that way, we must the difference in our work.
Thanks.
But the key challenge is how to sustain. I just would love to ask more minor comments. The key challenge is how to sustain our work after the process is completed, because as I mentioned, the local villagers and farmers, they do need to focus on their day-to-day work. So after the process, we need to built up a network of a network connection between the farmers and the scientists, so that they have collaboration information sharing. So that's our strategy to involve or continue our project. Otherwise, they will go back to their home and then they will struggling with their everyday realities and challenges, and they will return to their normal lives. Yep.
Thanks, Kong. Siddharth, I'll spin the question to you in a slightly different way. What has been your experience as a scholar communicating your findings and insights to journalists and mass media? Do you think they've understood your work? Is there a need for capacity building in that sector? Are they doing a good job of communicating to their readers?
That's a great question, Sumit. So I'll answer it in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Especially in the early stages, it was really, I felt like for 10 years I'd been sitting in a quiet corner doing work that I'm interested in. It's a subject I love. And then suddenly the whole world shows up, when COVID-19 hits. And I think that there are a lot of very good science journalists out there. And the vast majority with whom I've interacted have actually been very careful and very understanding about what, the science says and what it doesn't say after I explain it. So I've been very happy actually with the quality of journalism, at least when it comes to the scientific aspects of the 1918 flu pandemic. I did want to address the 2 points that you raised, though, Sumit. One is, what are the challenges you face related to multidisciplinary issues? I think this is a problem we still face in academia, not just in the US, but worldwide. We are incentivized to stay in our silos and stay in our disciplines. And sometimes when a problem like a pandemic hits, the silos don't allow us to explore, the many dimensions of the pandemic in ways that we should, and we can very productively. So I was quite surprised that, my training was in econometrics, among other, subjects. So those are statistical methods that are developed primarily for the analysis of economic data. But the methods are equally applicable to other types of data, for example, that appear in time series or, various formats. And so I found that I could very productively use econometric techniques to analyze epidemiologic data. And because epidemiologists weren't learning econometrics, they didn't have access to those methods. So, if you can, if you're willing to take that step, right, you can jump across disciplines and cross-fertilize in ways that A, is a lot of fun to do, right? But B, can yield a lot of very interesting new insights that are not being produced because people are kind of siloed in their own disciplines. The other thing about stakeholders, this may sound a little bit cynical, but, we've known about these pandemics for a long, long time. Those of us who've studied the 1918 flu pandemic, I've been doing it for 15 years. We were all just waiting for, not in a happy way, but we were waiting for the next one to happen because it's basically almost a statistical certainty. In fact, there will probably be another one. I can predict right now. I can't tell you when and how severe, but there will probably be another one, right? So what was kind of puzzling and surprising was, but perhaps not surprising too, is how our policy community and especially our, political, players, how reactive they are, right? We could have been much more proactive about this. There is a lot we learned from the 1918 flu that was directly applicable to COVID-19. And yet when COVID-19 came, we were like deer in the headlights, So I guess that's a huge barrier. Look at history, look at what we've been through in the past, understand that a lot of what we've been through in the past is entirely possible in the future, and prepare for it. It's as simple as that.
Thanks, Siddharth. Yeah, so I guess we can now open it up to questions from the participants. This first question, it's a very short one, and I would request an extremely short answer to that. Is Cambodia not part of any One Health networks? So Ramji, if you know the answer, just say yes or no.
Yeah, it is not. It is in the One Health network, but not covered by our program. It is not we decided. It is the U.S. government call that didn't include those, the Cambodia. But we are also surprised. We have been getting so many calls, so many requests from Cambodia, and so many people are attending our webinar from Cambodia. So I would suggest, to convey this message to U.S. Embassy in Cambodia, so that they will listen to it and improve.
Thanks. Okay, so here's a question. Often public health interventions call on smallholders to change their cultural practices of eating, cuisine, farming, animal husbandry practices. So how do the panelists think about their work in relation to this tension between the focus on individual behavior change and social dimensions of smallholder life? Ramji, you want to take a shot at that?
This seems to be a tough question. Yeah, definitely there is, dietary changes or priorities are happening. And so this, on one hand, is introducing the diversity in, taking food, and also the kind of, I believe, the practice of our, the inherent or indigenous or native, the taste are kind of slowly disappearing. So I don't have the clear-cut answer, but definitely there is such a dilemma going on, and so I stop here. I mean, so our efforts should definitely be, One Health also promote the native, if there are any native practice or the indigenous practices that has to be conserved or preserved, if there is, promoting the health of the public health or environmental health or animal health. So definitely those cultural practices of the food or cuisines, that has to be conserved, but not to the cost of the public health or environmental health or the human. Thank you.
How about the other two panelists? You want to take a shot at that question?
Yeah, I think my project is closely to this question, and I would love to ask them very short comments about us. Well, as I mentioned earlier, individuals and farmers in communities, they do have ability and desire to change the behavior in response to revenge and cope with the pandemics and issues. But how we can empower and mobilize them to do so? Because so our process. One of our objectives in our WB tracker project is to raise the awareness about the One Health, the environmental health, and the public health, and the animal health. So that's the key our approach, because we need to, if we don't educate the small, you can't hear the smallholders, the farmers and the fishermen about those issues. They don't have where to change their behavior and why they have to change. And more importantly, please be noted as there is the rise of what I call the neoliberal capitalist transition in the rural areas across the Southeast Asia, where the agricultural business, like the big farmers and the companies, they are also contributing significantly to emission and some other risks causing pandemics. So if in a country or in areas where the regulations are weak or governance are weak, so those actors need to be focused, because the small scale farmers and weaker actors in rural areas, they themselves don't have enough capacity and resources, even though they want to change their behaviors or farming practices, but they don't have resources to make an impactful change. So we have to consider those bigger or stronger actors in the rural economy as well. So thank you very much for the question. Yeah.
You have anything to add to that? Okay, fine. Yeah, so I have a question for the panelists relating to this question itself. In the human health sciences, you must have heard that there's a new field called implementation science, which is basically the issue of how do you scale up successful interventions to much bigger scales, right? And the 2-3 disciplines that contribute the most to that are behavioral science, psychology, anthropology, sociology, so on, and economists, of course. Can the larger scale interventions be affordable and so on? So the question to you, especially Ramji, is: are you aware if in the veterinary science there is anything parallel to the implementation science paradigm that's being used now? And I mean, I would then love to use this implementation science principles and apply it to One Health. If at all we are going to smallholders and small farmers and telling them to clean their shed or some XYZ intervention, and that seems to have worked on the smaller scale, then how do you scale this up to the entire province or the entire country? So Ramji, are you aware if implementation science or anything analogous to it has been used in the veterinary world? You have to unmute.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. That's a good question. We don't have such thing, but definitely what is happening these days is, as I mentioned earlier, even technical science field, there is a focus that technocentric worldview only isn't what will going to change the world. There has to be a holistic, multi-perspective visioning and practices that that will help understand the beneficiary, and that will help understand the other end of the spectrum and better understand. And you can customize your message. You can customize your the tools that is appropriate to the end users. So that is definitely being tried. But when I did my undergrad, but that was not the priority. It was mainly technical. I had the feeling that I when I graduated, I had the feeling that if a cattle is sick, then if I give some some injection, that would be good enough to treat it. But that's not the case. There are several factors other affecting the the behind the scene that is making that that could be the factoring making that animal sick. So I mean yeah, that is happening gradually, but in some area it may not be in the same speed it is happening in another part of the world, but it is again the context specific. But given this new this globalized world now, people are more sensitive, more aware of the tools and the development happening in other part of the world. And I would say it is gradually happening. People are being more cautious, more aware, and to provide the technology and the services to the need of the the customers. So I stop here. I don't know whether I answer your question or not, but
Okay, so the last question is pretty long, so I will try to paraphrase it. One of the participants was extremely impressed with the gender focus of Kwang's project, the citizen science work. So the question is for both Ramji and Siddharth: what gender dimensions do you see, or what gender dimensions do you suggest in your lines of work? Siddharth?
Unmute. So that's a great question. I'll answer it in the context of the 1918 influenza pandemic. One of the things we noticed in the data that we looked at for India, Indonesia, a number of other countries, is there was a very odd demography, an unusual demographic pattern with the 1918 flu, and that is that it disproportionately killed people between the ages of 20 and 40, right? If you look at COVID-19, it disproportionately killed elderly people. And your regular seasonal influenza disproportionately kills infants and elderly people, right? Those are sort of the standard patterns. So the 1918 flu was very unusual. And unfortunately, women in their childbearing years who are in any case vulnerable to infection happen to be by and large, ages 20 to 40. So it was actually really quite moving and depressing to look at the numbers. You actually saw this picture in the numbers of pregnant women dying in disproportionate numbers, deaths associated with childbirth spiking, premature births spiking, and stillbirth spiking, right? So in a very real and a very tangible way, the 1918 flu pandemic was disproportionately hard on women, right? In fact, when COVID-19 first came, this is something I think there was a newspaper in India, the Indian Express. I mentioned this in one of the interviews. I said, one of the things I'm really worried about is, are we going to see a similar pattern with COVID-19? And fortunately, it didn't turn out that way. But this is not to say that a future pandemic could not have a similar pattern, and it's something we need to be vigilant about. So that's one example. I think that's Amanda's question. That's one example about how gender very overtly manifests in at least how one major zoonotic pandemic played out.
Thanks, Siddharth. Ramji?
Yeah, certainly speaking, I give two examples. So one is the project that I am currently leading on. Another is the community that I came up. I was born and I grew up. So especially in rural areas, South Asian in rural South Asia rural areas, where women are the one contributing to 70% of the work. That they contribute to the 7% of the farm work, including raising livestock. But they are the one, eating the last. They are the one who will have the last, the small pieces of the pie. The majority will be eaten by their male counterpart. So definitely there is a fairly uneven and very equitable, share in the benefit sharing. But on the flip side, they are contributing more. That is, they are definitely affecting the gender. There is more gender equity in there.
Thanks, Ramji. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but in the Mekong project, fortunately, currently I briefly mentioned about the short course that we conducted. There were 200 over 500 over applications, but most of the applicants, over 50% were women students and faculty. So it was so fascinating to see that. So I would say there is, proportionately that degree of participation is different, and in some cases it is better, in some cases it is still to be improved.
Thanks, Ramji. And actually, I want to come to the defense of the organizers of this panel. I know Micah and Mingli wanted a fourth panelist, and highly preferably woman, but the fact that this has turned into a panel was not something that they wanted, but they tried hard to get a better gender balance on this thing. And I suggested someone from Vietnam, but she didn't respond. It's a long holiday going on in Vietnam these days. So please forgive us all. It was not intentional. So now I hope in the last 30 minutes, you've done your homework. Tell me that one thing that has impressed you by listening to the other two panelists, or one lesson that you have learned, or something exciting that you learned. Let's start with you, Kwong.
Oh, well, I'm typing my answer to Amanda's question there. Okay, just briefly, Amanda and those who would love to learn more about our work and the WE tracker, why we focus on women in our work there. I just sent the link on the chart, so you can follow that to understand the gender balance, the gender sensitive approach in our research. So just briefly, I would summarize two key points that I would love to take away from our panelists here. Firstly, the transparency approach and transparency collaboration is the key to our pandemic issue, is Ramsey mentioned in their collaboration with the other lower Mekong countries. And actually, that's exactly what's happening in the lower Mekong with the support from the external actors like the U.S. government and Australia. From the discussion of the Dr. Chandra, we could see that the how the poverty undermine the capacity of the communities in identifying the risk of disease and in coping with the challenges. So Indonesia is the right example of how we could start with in preventing the disease, like the disaster in 1919. That could be something that we could consider. I mean, the terminating poverty it could be the starting point to have the poverty lift out of their poverty disease natures. Thank you.
Thanks, Wang. Siddharth, what did you learn? Less than a minute, please.
Well, you know, I work with data on a computer and software. I think it would be wonderful to collaborate with scholars who work on the ground, collecting data, you know, using grassroots methods, interacting with institutions and the people who are affected by these kinds of diseases directly. So that's one thing I learned. I think there's so much room for somebody like me to learn more about the context within which all of this is occurring on the ground.
Great.
And I look forward to the opportunity to do so in the future. Thank you.
Ramji?
Yeah, two things. This is an excellent question. Thank you, Sumit. First of all, I like many we have seen in the publications that the example that Siddharth has mentioned about the pandemic. I mean, the pandemic in early 1990s, 1900 in Indonesia. It shows that we haven't learned much lesson from that, and we are not prepared when COVID-19 happened, and we suffer so much that everybody knows. But what we witness today is there is so much opportunity for collaboration and understanding each other that is happening, and good initiative have started. So we need to communicate with each other, keep in touch, and then there is so much happening, and we can learn. We should continue learning and co-learning from each other.
Thanks a lot. You have all been so wonderful and so cooperative. I know I came in the last minute. I couldn't choreograph this thing perfectly, but I think it's turned out well. I know there's a remaining question related to my work, why peri-urban areas where smallholders and commercial scale operations are at higher risk. I would just invite that person to write to me and we can have a discussion on that. So thanks, Siddharth, Ramji, Kwang, for giving us your time. And as a representative of the East West Center, though I'm not part of the LuceSEA project, but let us thank the LuceSEA Foundation for supporting this kind of knowledge exchange. And certainly for the patient participants who've been listening to all of us, especially at all odd times, thanks a lot for being with us. And I guess we are ready to sign off.
Thank you, Sumit. Thank you all to the organizers.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, and hope to see you soon in person. Thank you. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.